A massive thank you to Epic Games for sponsoring this video. Back in June we got the first of 2 DLCs which expanded on the Remedyverse, and that DLC was a really great addition to the Alan Wake lore. Now the second DLC is dropped, titled The Lake House. The Lake House sees FBC agent Kiran Estevez investigating the lake house near to Cauldron Lake, which has gone dark, and sees her descend into twisted sub-levels of paranatural phenomena where reality and the dark place are colliding. As mentioned, we play as Agent Estevez, but we have a new type of enemy, the Painted Shadows, along with the Taken, a new weapon, and we also have a returning minor character from Alan Wake 1. The DLC also has an interesting and complex story behind it too. The DLC ticked all the boxes for me and was super creepy, so make sure you experience it for yourselves by upgrading to the deluxe version of Alan Wake 2 now. In order to access this expansion content for yourselves, use my link down in the comments. Now before we begin, please note that there will be story spoilers in this video for Alan Wake 2 and Control, but with all that being said, let's jump in. So let's begin by looking at some context behind this DLC. In Control, right at the end of the AWE DLC, during the Oldest House lockdown, Jesse noticed a distress call coming from Bright Falls, indicating that an AWE is about to take place. 4 years later, during Saga Anderson's investigation in Cauldron Lake, she can come across this gate. It bears the FBC logo on it, and pressing the button on the intercom is an unrewarding affair, as there's no answer. The FBC have been doing experiments in and around the Cauldron Lake woods, and one of these experiments in question was carried out by a Dr. Campbell and involved nursery rhymes. They were looking at how nursery rhymes could be used to establish a connection with the Cauldron Lake threshold. However, this did not end well for Dr. Campbell.
Get to the point.
What? Hello? Hey, are you there?
Sounds like this person got more than they bargained for.
The FBC had also been around Bright Falls in the nearby town of Watery, conducting covert operations, listening into conversations to ascertain whether civilians were aware of the lake house's existence. It was discovered that rumours had surfaced about the FBC abducting people to experiment on in a facility in the woods, so yes, people are kind of aware. Anyway, at some point in the story, Agent Kiran Estevez arrives in Bright Falls and heads to Cauldron Lake. Attempting to use the intercom, Estevez receives no reply, so she uses her security pass to gain entry. Walking down a short path, she arrives at the lake house facility, which has seemingly gone dark. Entering the facility, there's no one about, but she is greeted by a welcome video featuring the co-heads of research, husband and wife duo Doctors Jules Marmont, and Diana Marmont. Jules tries to make a joke, but Diana is having none of it, hinting at a bit of friction between the pair. According to a whiteboard with the dailies on it, apparently the oldest house is still dark, but they have pie and coffee, so that's good. They still think that Zachariah Trench is the director of the FBC, but of course he's dead, and Jesse Faden is now the director. They also say that Deerfest is happening that week too, which people seem to be looking forward to. But more importantly, she finds a document on Jules Marmont's desk, which mentions a Class 2 Para-Utilitarian. In case you're not aware, Para-Utilitarian is someone who possesses powers of a paranatural nature. People such as Jesse and Dylan Faden, Alan Wake, and according to the document here, Subject P. Subject P possesses an ability which manifests while he is painting. In keeping with the Dark Presence preferred targets, Subject P is an artist. He is apparently able to paint an event before it has even happened. As the FBC researchers are able to control the effects of the painter's abilities, he is not viewed as a danger to anyone. Looking at Jules' computer in an email from the Lake House's facility administrator Harry Kingston, he sent out a simple reminder for both doctors' proposed annual budgets for their research. He asks for a thorough breakdown of costs, but Diana replies that she doesn't have time for a meeting, but that they should set aside a percentage of the budget for her project. She seems to believe that that way, a certain someone won't be tempted to slow down their competition. This someone is her own husband Jules, but why would Jules be trying to sabotage his own wife's research? Well, we'll get into that, but let's continue on for now. Jules suggests that maybe Diana isn't up to the job of co-head researcher, and then she sends a rather vicious but understandable email. Using Marmont's computer to unlock the doors for the elevator and finding a level 1 security keycard, Estevez heads down to sub-level 1. On the way down though, something happens to the elevator. The power is shut off, so it needs to be restored. Stepping out into sub-level 1, Estevez hears the alarm going off and she learns that a breach has been detected on sub-level 5. She needs to get the power going in order to 1. Find a keycard with a high enough clearance to get to the lower sub-levels, and 2. To find out what's going on and what the breach is. She orders all her agents to move in on the facility. Something happens though and she sees things. Slightly disturbed by this, she pushes on and sees that the entire room has shifted and everything is covered in paint. She hears noises and sees creepy painted silhouettes in the paintings themselves. Abstract art is everywhere. She uses a power cord to get the power back on, and some of the lights, thankfully, as whatever this paranatural event is, had turned them off. Estevez finds that the elevator has bizarrely moved, so after pushing a button inside a control room, she moves an art piece and heads to the elevator. To her horror, the silhouettes in the paintings pull themselves away from them and try to attack her, but her bullets do absolutely nothing. The elevator takes her to sub-level 2, and a single large painting awaits her at the end of a long hallway, and it seems alive. She speaks to it and asks what it is. It explains that it's both a murderer and a victim, and the painting speaks of an anger. She speaks of her encounters with the painted figures, and the painting responds with the words, 1,000 paintings, no brush, and a self-portrait. The painting cries out, fire in his eyes and hands and bones. Something happens again, and Estevez finds herself still in the hallway, but the really peed-off painting is now gone. Before we go any further, let's have a quick look at exactly who the Marmonts are. So let's look at the Marmonts and what seemed to change their loving marriage into hatred for one another. Jules Marmont graduated from Barrows University with a degree of Doctor of Applied Sciences, and he would go on to work for the FBC and would receive a special service certificate from one Dr. Casper Darling, who of course was the head of the FBC at the oldest house, until he mysteriously went missing 4 years earlier. Jules was then appointed as head of research at the Lake House facility at Cauldron Lake from the date of July 18th, and this appointment was to be shared with his wife Diana, who was a rising star in the Bureau too. But they would butt heads a lot, and this is evidenced by reading various notes and memos found around the lake house. Over time, dark thoughts started to enter their minds. It seems that they both had their own projects going, and there were 2 projects going on there by the names of Project Arbutus and Project Rhamnus. As Estevez enters sub-level 3, she learns all about the project that Diana was working on. Project X-10032-AW focused on the writings of Alan Wake. In one of the offices on sub-level 3, Estevez finds 2 of Alan Wake's manuscripts stuck to the whiteboard. It appears there's been some serious analysis going on in regard to Wake's writing. They've been analysing the words per sentence, his writing style, and the concepts that he dives into. He's been writing about them, about Jules and Diana, their past, their careers with the Bureau, even thoughts they've had that no one else could know. And this confuses Diana as she doesn't understand how this is possible. She also can't accept that their careers have been dictated by one man's words. They had another investigation, which was a typewriter brand investigation, as they wanted to know what specific typewriter Alan would use. They tried to ask Wake's publisher, Wake's agent Barry, and his wife Alice, and they all refused to discuss it. They would even want to know the specific type of ink that Alan used. Her team went on to develop what was termed an automated typing device. The idea is that it mimics the writings of Alan Wake, producing the same effect on reality as Alan's writings. The machines wanted to know Alan's style, his subtle nuances, style, tone, and content. The pages they did hold were fed into an algorithm as reference material in order to produce near-identical stories to Alan Wake. They wanted to learn the power of Wake's connection with what the FBC termed the shadow. A room full of these machines was set up, and on a whiteboard they tracked how many of these pages were actually viable creations that could pass off as being the same as Alan's work. Diana would extensively read and go over the manuscript pages.
There was a crack in the lake house. The Marmonts had let the lake in, but the water could not flow. It became trapped, stagnant, went bad. The truth was controlled here. The art was not art, just content for the experiment. Arranged wrong, the dream logic flawed, the feedback loop doubled and redoubled out of control. The pressure kept building, looking for release. This contrived overlap rebounded on itself. Compressing, compounding, reflecting, and refracting. An urban legend and a murder in constant imbalance. Cause and effect hopelessly tangled. The author's clearly awake. It's like he's warning us. But about what? I mean, what does it mean? This page scared Jules away from the work on Wake's writing. A coward can't stand risk. But science is risk. For me, this is proof that we are going in the right direction.
But this wasn't working. Diana needed more reference pages, samples of Alan's actual writings, which of course were considered altered items. An email from a senior researcher, Dr. Perry Levine, to Jules Marmont states that they have the Alan Wake pages, the references that Project Arbutus needs, and that Project Arbutus are asking for the pages. Jules would respond to Perry and he told him to tell Diana that they'd misplaced the pages in an unfortunate filing accident. As a way of keeping Diana at bay, he told Perry to tell her that the pages will likely turn up in a few weeks, and he finishes the email by saying that his project, which we'll get to shortly, is making progress. Diana felt defeated, but she was determined.
We're still behind our projections. The more the machines can produce, the closer we can calibrate them to Wake's style. But proper calibration takes a lot of raw material and production is slow. No. We're changing directions. The hypothesis remains unchanged. Imitating Wake's writing style will allow us to generate art capable of linking with the threshold. Our live subject should match Wake's style much faster. People can be calibrated just like a machine. You simply have to push the right buttons.
She needed live subjects.
I can't allow Jules to stumble his way into success. Not after the years of work I put into this research. I got word yesterday that 2 writers are visiting Bright Falls. I will beat Jules to the finish line.
But for now, let's continue on. Attempting to leave sub-level 3, Estevez is back where she started, and she notes that this is something called spatial recurrence, and she says that it usually observes the law of 3, and this is her second time round. Seeing dead bodies there, she goes into the automated typing device room and is confronted by many lakehouse workers, maintenance, scientists, security, all of them corrupted by the dark presence, or the shadow. After dispatching them all, she heads down the corridor again, and as per the law of 3, she loops back round. Walking through the large room with the typing machines for the third and final time, Estevez spots bleed through, an overlap of another location, and she sees another painting which features a man on it. Walking towards it, the bleed through stops, and pulling another lever, Estevez shifts the environment around her, which is controlling shifting phenomena, and she speaks with the painting again. This time, she learns that whoever has done this to them, the Marmonts, are responsible for it. She asks where the Marmonts are, but the painting shouts the word misery and screams the man in a white coat before it disappears again. Heading to the next floor, Estevez sees an area with 2 containment cells and a load of staff that are corrupted by the darkness. The entire floor is on lockdown and one of the cells has been breached, with what looks like blood everywhere. Agent Estevez finds a manuscript on the floor of the cell.
Jules Marmont looked at the painting. He didn't understand it. Saw only random whirls of color. Drugging Lane made him more compliant, but his work had turned abstract. Jules needed more art his team could parse, could test, trial and error. These abstract explosions of color complicated the data. His grip tightened around the letter opener in his hand. The piece of art he needed was hidden inside Lane. If Jules could simply cut the painter open and pull the painting out of him, he would. The overhead lights flickered. Jules would make Lane cooperate. No more drugs. Less carrot, more stick. Jules had to go faster. He wouldn't lose to Diana. Nothing else mattered.
Now let's look at what Jules' project involved. So Jules was heading up Project R, which actually started after Project Arbutus, but we'll get to that. As we've heard, this project involved the painter. A document speaks of these paintings and mentions Subject P again. It talks about them using the paintings to adjust reality, and it not really working the way they'd hoped, but that they had another viable option that they could use. It spoke of using the energies of the threshold and its reality-altering effects. Essentially, they'd planned to let the lake in, so to speak, the crack in the lake house. They planned to do this as they learned that the threshold is drawn to pieces of art that contain a significant level of emotion. They started to look at ways they could measure the level of emotion in a work of art. Going back to one of the offices on sub-level 2 again, the manuscript on the whiteboard speaks of a Rudolph Lane, and him stepping back from the canvas, not realizing what it is that he just painted. It was more abstract, whereas his usual style of painting was a landscape or a portrait. Project C-43210-RL was focused on the paintings of Rudolph Lane. Rudolph Lane is someone that we've met before, actually. In Alan Wake, he was one of the artists that Dr. Emil Hartman was pretending to help. In reality, Hartman wanted to use these artists to harness the power of Cauldron Lake and the dark presence inside it, and wanted to manipulate reality. After the dark presence attacked the Cauldron Lake Lodge, Rudolph Lane didn't die. He was transferred to Seattle, where he recovered, and he then moved to Watery, and then he was taken by the FBC and to the lake house because they'd received a list of artists who were at the lodge from Hartman's files. Of course, Hartman himself, well, let's just say it didn't really end very well for him, as the darkness in him merged with the hiss from the control, and he turned into this. Anyway, Rudolph suspected that the FBC were putting things in his food. He was being made to paint. That was until one day Rudolph Lane simply refused to paint anymore, and this halted the team's research while they ran tests on Lane's backlog of paintings that he'd already done. Due to his refusal to keep painting, however, Marmont drugged Rudolph Lane to try and get him to comply. Lane's attitude towards art changed. He started destroying his work, and as mentioned before, his art became conceptual rather than of subjects or landscapes. They tried to decipher whether Lane's direction towards the abstract is a form of rebellion or genuine artistic interest.
Lane was found dead in his cell this morning. It's an unfortunate setback. But when a door is closed, a window is opened. I believe that's the saying. Lane may be gone, but he left us with a goodbye present. A final piece of art. This piece is different. It's raw emotion, pure truth. He put everything he had into this one. Literally. Every reading we take is off the charts. This is what we have been waiting for. It is the key. I will achieve what no one has before me. Not darling, that arrogant shit. Not my selfish harpy or the wife.
So, we have a painter and a painting that can talk. Clearly connected. But Lane was dead before any of this even happened.
I never needed any of it. The fools will finally see me for the genius I am.
Also there in the other cell is the person that Diana Marmont had abducted for her research. You may recognize him, it's Ed Booker. After the oldest house went dark, Diana moved on and carried on with her plan to use live subjects. Ed and his wife Tammy, both of them authors, were observed by the Lake House staff and identified as potential candidates for the next phase of their program. They were there at Cauldron Lake for Deerfest and witnessed the cult of the tree murdering FBI agent Robert Nightingale in one of their rituals. Estevez asks Ed what he's doing there, and he replies that he's got a flow going. Through conversation, it seems that Ed was abducted in the woods, and he thinks that he's in an immersive writing workshop that Tammy had arranged for him. He also thinks that Estevez is an actor playing a role in this workshop, and from a nearby document, we can see that they're trying to get Ed to write like Alan Wake. This is after Diana's AI typewriting experiment had failed to produce viable results. Diana was confused as to why the focus points were on the Marmonts' marriage, and why Jules is the protagonist of the story. He'd been told to write about the lake house and the shadow, and he also thought that Diana was an actor too. And from another document, although Tammy was more successful in her writing, Ed's style of writing was considered more arty, therefore he was picked for this task. Although he had parameters to abide by when he was writing, as they needed to get as close to Wake's work as possible, Ed did not stick by them. Estevez tells Ed to stay put while she tries to resolve the situation at the lake house. Lifting the lockdown on that floor, she manages to obtain a level 2 security card from next to a dead researcher. She hears from her team. They say they're on sub-level 1, but she tells them to head back as the area is extremely hostile. Their line then goes dead. Estevez defeats a load more taken and returns to sub-level 1, where she hears gunshots and finds her team dead. A man in a white coat stands before her and then disappears. She identifies him as Jules Marmont and confirms that he's been taken by the Shadow. Now that she has a level 2 clearance, she gains access to inventory management and gets a level 3 card, and she grabs the strange weapon she saw earlier. So, the gun. Well, one day Jules Marmont, in celebration of fall, or autumn as we say in the UK, had bought pecan pie for everyone in his team. Of course, he took a jab at his wife because she did not buy any pie. And unfortunately for one person in Diana's research team, one of the senior researchers called Carla Livingston, well, she had a nut allergy. So she sent a message to HR and her complaint was relayed to people. But Jules? He didn't take this well, and he would cruelly demote her to acting inventory supervisor on the first sub-level. Her time wasn't wasted though, as she developed this weapon which used Blackrock powder. Blackrock is a valuable resource, and at the oldest house, there's an entire quarry of this stuff, but due to the oldest house having been locked down for the last 4 years, the lake house are running out. Something that Jules Marmont would remind the staff of. Carla would conduct testing on the weapon, but she needed more Blackrock powder, commenting that there's some on sub-level 5, but that she no longer has access to that floor since she's been demoted. It seems she stole Jules' level 3 keycard though, retrieved some Blackrock, ground it down to a powder, and stashed it around the place. Before we get back into the plot, let's now take a look at the Marmonts' descent into, well, darkness. The way we need to look at what happened to the Marmonts is through the many documents scattered around. They have dates on and are a bit jumbled up, so we need to build a timeline of events up until the point when the DLC kicks off. Hopefully that way we can clear some stuff up, as the story and its events are pretty complex. Before they were at each other's throats, Jules and Diana worked well as a team.
When the source material is open to interpretation, how will the Shadow choose to interpret it? I think Diana will find the question very interesting. Most likely, she already has an answer. That's why I love her.
On the 15th of July 2016, Diana started drawing up plans for Project Arbutus. This was to understand and study the definition of art, the ability to be able to define art based on a unit of measurement. She references past examples of Cauldron Lake's threshold affecting reality through art, such as Tom Zane in 1970, Alan Wake in 2010. She recommended looking at other forms of art as viable ways to bridge the threshold to reality. Over a year later, on 15th of December 2017, a threshold study was carried out by the Marmonts. An early warning system was also constructed near the shore of Cauldron Lake, and this is what we can see during the main game, and as we can see, there's a warning going off when Saga finds it. 4 months later, Diana finds notes regarding Dr. Emil Hartman and requests live subjects, leading to Jules' anger towards Diana. Dr. Casper Darling then makes a trip to the lake house to check in on the research going on there, much to Jules Marmont's frustration. Dr. Darling would record his address to the researchers there at the lake house during his visit, and Dr. Marmont started to unravel after this visit from Dr. Darling though. On the 13th of December 2019, the lake house compiles a report on Rudolph Lane and his involvement in the Bright Falls Altered World event in 2010, and at some point Lane is brought to the facility. Nearly a whole year later, on the 12th of September 2020, Diana and Jules Marmont, after the oldest house had gone dark, wrote a mandate for their research. They wanted to create a stable connection between the Cauldron Lake threshold and their own reality, to be able to traverse it safely. They built a lab on sub-level 5 which was built to experiment on the link to the threshold with a piece of art as the bridge between the two. Then on the 19th of January 2022, things would change. They'd come across pages from a manuscript they suspected was written by Alan Wake. Diana became confused about the content as the page summarizes her life with her husband Jules, turning them into characters for a story. As mentioned earlier, she is baffled by the detail Wake wrote regarding the thoughts that only they would know. She mentions that they have both been in more conflict with each other for the past year. 6 months later, as part of Project Arbutus, a new investigation began. As already mentioned, they contacted people close to Alan to learn about his official choice of typewriter. On the 1st of March 2023, Jules wrote an email to Diana telling her that after finding the manuscript page, they needed to abandon the research into Alan Wake's writing, claiming that it would endanger their staff, but Diana accused Jules of just looking out for himself. The truth is that Jules, as you've already heard, was terrified of what Wake was writing, as he'd written him and Diana as monsters, that the page they'd found promised disaster.
The lake house was underwater. The Marmonts' ambitions had finally been realized. Jules had dangled the painting like a lure and hooked an ocean. Their machines couldn't hold it. A fault in the system. The water rushed in, filled it until it was ready to burst. All their successes and failures had led them here. The work had made them into monsters. But the lake house was still theirs. It always would be. They could feel an outsider trespassing in their labs. "I know you're here," they called out to the dark. They hunted floor by floor. They wouldn't let the intruders stop their progress. This was their home. Their beloved tomb beneath the waves.
Over time, the Marmonts became even more corrupted and differed in regard to their preferred method of research, so they created 2 projects, with both of them vying to defeat the other, and to hell with protocol, safety, and employee concerns. So on the 6th of March 2023, the Lake House research team were divided between 2 projects. Project Arbutus, which focused on the writings of Alan Wake, for which Diana was the project director, and then Project Rhamnus focused on the paintings of Rudolph Lane, pursuing that as a more viable and safe avenue of research, for which Jules Marmont was the project director. Jules conducted an experiment on 10th of March 2023, which is an attempt to try and create a stable link between reality and the Cauldron Lake threshold. Attempt to use the paintings was unsuccessful, at first anyway. Jules also then got to work attempting to sabotage his wife's project, but this was more out of trying to protect the staff members, with him mostly targeting members of Diana's team for silly little things. For example, Carla and her nut allergy and being demoted. And he also fired a woman named Trisha for speaking and being vocal during a meeting after she raised safety concerns. On the 24th of March 2023, Diana and her team created the autotyping machines. And remember that I mentioned that Jules' team found Wake's manuscript pages? Well, when he was painting landscapes, Lane was painting these pages into his art, and the researchers would go to these sites and would find the pages.
Jules' team has found new pages written by Wake. He must have gotten Rudolph Lane painting again. His bullshit pedestrian methodology cannot produce results before mine. I have to go faster, no matter the cost.
That was until Rudolph Lane refused to keep painting.
I can't paint anymore. I know you want me to paint, but I can't. I'm empty.
Rudolph, no.
You love to paint. And you are such a talent. This is just the classic artist slump. No, I hate it. It's just taking from me now. When can I leave? You said you'd let me leave.
Rudolph, but you volunteered to come, remember?
We are helping you, like Dr. Hartman did. Perhaps you need to see our doctor? I can arrange that. No, that's... I am feeling better. Much better. I will paint.
This is wonderful to hear, Rudolph.
I knew you would come back to your old self.
On the 31st of August 2023, Jules asked members of his team to spy on Diana's project. Staff ended up wanting to transfer out of the lake house because of the tension between Jules and Diana. It was also around this time that Jules and his team were purposely withholding Wake's manuscript pages from Diana and her team. By the 4th of September 2023, Diana was fully suspicious of Jules' attempt at sabotaging her research, and this was seen through the annual budget emails. But then, the following day, an increase in activity stemming from the Cauldron Lake threshold resulted in the Altered World Event Response Team being contacted. Work continued though, and research was carried out on the Bookers. Diana then found notes regarding a manuscript page that she found in the archive. She discovered that the page wasn't in their inventory, and that it manifested there in the lake house. The notes also said that a painting succeeded in linking the Cauldron Lake threshold with the lake house. She was confused as to why Wake's writing used a different art form to deliver success, and she resented Jules for it because she didn't want to accept that he was on the right track for the whole painting angle. This is about when she had Tammy and Ed Booker kidnapped. She then also put a complaint into HQ about Jules and his sabotage. At the same time, she tried to get Ed Booker to write like Alan Wake. As I said, Jules and Diana had always worked as a team, but it seemed that Jules got all the credit for both of their work, so perhaps Diana felt she'd been overlooked and wanted some credit for herself. But the dark presence played on that and amplified that bad feeling. And then, at some point...
Diana sat in her office. A weak desk light kept the darkness around her at bay. The silence of the archive suited her. She scowled at a series of graphs when the room turned red. Alarms blared. Breach detected. Then the walls of the archives rumbled. A tremor in the bones of the facility. One by one, the red lights went dark as a wave of nothing poured in from all sides. Diana stood, but there was nowhere to run. The sheer depth of the darkness terrified her. She realized they had done this. Her and Jules. Their ambition. Their hatred. Her desk lamp flickered. In the brief moment before it all went dark, she thought of Jules' smile.
And this leads us up to the 14th of September when Estevez and the team arrived at the lake house, but again, let's continue on. Moving on and using the new Blackrock Launcher to annihilate the painted shadows, Estevez uses the new clearance she got and descends to sub-level 4, as she speaks with the painting again. Asking the painting about Rudolph Lane, it replies the shape of a man, and she surmises that the painting is what's left of Lane, to which the painting replies that it's a self-portrait. She says that she can help him, but the painting gets angry again and disappears. A manuscript lies on the floor.
Rudolph Lane was dying. Both murderer and victim. Red hues ran down his hands. Was it scarlet or cadmium? Too vivid to be maroon. Names don't matter, he decided. Color was pure. Inspiring. For the first time in years, he wanted to paint. A self-portrait. To say goodbye. No. To make them remember. To make them see what they did. He slapped his hands against the wall to steady himself. He began from there. No brush, just himself. The strokes were crude, violent. The pain, misery, and hate he'd endured there. The fire in his eyes and hands and bones all spread into the shape of a man. It was quick. Natural. Like a heart attack. He slumped down to the floor, smiling at the anger he left smeared across the wall.
On sub-level 4, Estevez enters the archives. It's a massive maze. She makes her way through it, fighting painted shadows and Taken, and she comes to a large office. And this is the Marmonts' office. Activating another controlled shift, the lights go off, and the office is shrouded in darkness. She hears a rather angry recording of Diana Marmont planning something incredibly stupid.
He booked the lab. Some big experiment tomorrow. I can't find the details anywhere. That bastard is hiding them. All those years, he steals credit from my ideas and my work, and now he's scared of being plagiarized? Oh, that is really fucking rich, Jules. Oh, and he's reportedly misplaced the manuscript pages I need for my work. Suddenly, the exact pages that I need to reference have just vanished. He is actively impeding critical bureau research. I mean, if he can do that, then what is stopping me from going down to that lab? And I don't know, just inverting the amplifiers or misaligning the receivers or both. It's the same thing in principle.
Leaving the office and heading to the elevator, Estevez heads down to the bottom floor, sub-level 5, the lab. She approaches the Threshold experimentation lab and spots the scene that she's been seeing, the overlap, the painting. Jules Marmont had bridged the link between the two realities by using the painting which contained Rudolph Lane and all the subsequent emotion that went into it. The Marmonts had indeed opened up the door to the Cauldron Lake Threshold. It needs to be closed and for the breach to be contained. Going to sever the link to the Threshold, Jules Marmont is there and attacks Estevez. The Marmonts' offices were located below the waterline of Cauldron Lake, so this explains how the darkness corrupted them so quickly and so easily once the threshold was opened. The corrupted Diana shows up too and hits Jules over the head with a lump of Blackrock, and continues to hit him, caving his head in. A shocked Estevez then has to jump to her feet and fight Diana. Dodging projectiles, painted shadows and burning away the darkness with her flashlight, Estevez eventually defeats her. She speaks with the painting, Rudolph, and shutting the threshold down will kill him. But the threshold is tearing itself apart, so Estevez has no choice but to shut it down, containing the threat. She is now in the overlap and sees Alan Wake sat at his typewriter still typing away, talking about Estevez finding him in the woods in Bright Falls. She then finds herself outside the lake house gate alongside Ed Booker. She then calls the surviving members of her team and tells them to meet her in Bright Falls, and the game then ends. So it wouldn't be an Alan Wake video without more questions popping up, and one thought I had was in regard to the overlap. The overlap occurring around Cauldron Lake could have been due to the threshold having been messed with by Diana Marmont. This was orchestrated by Scratch, written into reality, in order to facilitate his escape from the dark place in the main game story. Rudolph Lane's painting was the bridge between the Cauldron Lake threshold and reality, in order for Scratch to escape. I guess Estevez speaking to the painting here is the same as how Saga was able to speak to Alan through the overlap. In his visit to the lake house, Darling mentioned taking data regarding the shadow back to the oldest house to run against the Hedron project. I'm not sure what that will lead to, but it sets things up for Control too, I guess. Oh, and speaking of Control, if you go to the Darken Marmont's office, you can find a note which is from Dr. Darling to the Marmonts, and it talks about drawings by a subject at the oldest house designated P6, or Prime Candidate 6. We know this is Dylan Faden. Well, after checking all the pictures out, a light switch appears. Pulling the cord 3 times in line with the law of 3, Estevez is temporarily transported to the Ocean View Motel. Inside a room at the end of the hallway, she finds a containment unit, and Dylan Faden is sat inside. He's whispering about a forest, and he gets up and says it's been a long time since he's seen anyone, but says that he's where he belongs. The last we saw of Dylan, he had entered into a coma after being cleansed of his corruption by his sister and new FBC director Jesse Faden. Asking what happened at the oldest house 4 years prior, Dylan says that they were attacked. And this is obviously by the hiss. Then hearing voices, he freaks out. He says that something's changing outside. Estevez tries to talk, but her speech becomes warbled. Dylan then asks Estevez to tell Jesse that he tried. He then seemingly sends Estevez back to the lake house again. Pretty cryptic that, but it's a cool bridge to Control 2, nonetheless. But here's one to leave you with. What's with the circles? On the ground floor level, we see that pencils and donuts have been arranged into circles. There's a circle drawn over these 3 posters too. And what's up with the 3 S's? Jules purposely says that the 3rd S is censorship, even though it begins with a C. What could this mean? Comment down below with your theories. But that's it for this video on the second and final DLC for Alan Wake 2. A massive thank you to Epic Games for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you want to play it for yourself, my link is down there in the comments. But if you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like on it and subscribe if you aren't already. But for now, take care and I will see you in the next one.